tonight's ayah from Surah An-Nisa, ayah number 34, and I have shared that with you yesterday night, so I hope inshallah you've done just some reading on this ayah. Over my 10 years of career in Islamic work, 8 years at Salam and 2 or 3 years in other places, I have always refrained from talking about this particular ayah. And you must have noticed, I never addressed this topic before, not in any khutbah, not in any talk, not in a lecture. I've never addressed it because it was a controversial verse, or at least people's perceptions of it are very controversial. And this is the one ayah that is always constantly used against us. I have seen scores of Muslims, young Muslims, that have renounced Islam because of this ayah. And I have seen people who are on the verge of accepting Islam who refused the very last minute because of this ayah. Or because of their understanding of the ayah, rather. The ayah is beautiful, and inshallah I will share with you what it means in a few minutes. I have seen in one of my classes years ago, wallahi, there was a sister who had been Muslim for about a year. And we were having this discussion, and I asked them to open up the Quran, and she opened up the verse, right? And she read this verse, she left the class. And I struggled with her for 2 years in order to help her understand the ayah, and alhamdulillah, she's still Muslim. She works now in Africa in the Peace Corps. But this ayah sometimes has that impact on people, especially sisters, especially non-Muslims. So here goes the ayah number 34 in Surah An-Nisa. الرجال قوامون على النساء بما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض وبما أنفقوا من أموالهم فالصالحات قانتات حافظات الغيب بما حفظ الله واللاتي تخافون نشوزهن فعظوهن واهجروهن في المضاجع واضربوهن فإن أطعنكم فلا تبغوا عليهن سبيلا إن الله كان عليا كبيرا. The ayah number 34 in Surah An-Nisa. You can read the translation. We're going to be talking about this for a while, a couple of nights, maybe 3, depending on how much time we have to cover it, inshallah. I have seen all kinds of people writing hateful things about us because of this. I have seen so many sisters over the years coming to me with complaints of domestic violence, where their husbands basically beat them, and they tell them, this is what the Quran says, I'm doing this for your own good. Those cases are not really that much, but once in a while I get that domestic abuse case, and what makes it so disheartening is the verses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are used to justify this atrocity. The ayah in the Quran is used to justify aggression against women, where one of the very last admonitions of the Prophet ﷺ to the Ummah before he died was take care of the women of our Ummah. Take care of An-Nisa, right? Take care of your women. That is one of the last pieces of advice Prophet ﷺ gave us, and I see brothers, rarely, but I see in our community, I see brothers that use this ayah to justify using physical violence with their wives. This is something that must be addressed. And I wanted to give you a quick historical background, because it's important to understand the nuances of social life in Arabia at the Prophet's time. The Quran was revealed in a historical, in a social context. The verses of the Quran are not independent and isolated from that context, right? The people of Mecca, among the Arabs, among all of the Arabs, were known to be the most violent with their women. They were the most dominating men among all the people of the Arabs, right? And this famous story, as opposed to Medina, for example, where women were known to be very honorable, very opinionated, very strong, independent, right? They would never accept their husbands laying a finger on them. They would divorce them or just leave them immediately. But the women of Mecca were not like that. It was sort of a common practice. It was accepted, right, for them to get some beating from their husbands once in a while, as bad as that sounds, right? In fact, I'll tell you this, and this was mentioned by Al-Hakim and Ibn Habban, where الزبير بن العوام أحد العشر المبشرين بالجنة, they say about him كان ضرابا للنساء. He was in the habit of hitting his wives. Who was the wife of الزبير بن العوام, by the way? The mother of Abdullah ibn Zubayr. ذات النطاقين أسماء رضي الله عنها, right? They were having an argument once, and he started hitting her, And Abdullah ibn Zubayr stood between them, and he said to his father, you can't do that. You can't hit that al-nitaqain. This is the one that helped the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr as-Siddiq in their hijrah. You can't do that. And of course arguments happen in families and so forth, and he was accepted in Meccan society for such things to happen. And that was the reason Zubayr ibn al-Awwam divorced her. He got so angry that his son stood between them that he decided, you know what, your mother is divorced. Now you think this is one of the greatest of the companions, but at the end of the day he was a human being. He was the byproduct of his own culture, and he was accepted in Mecca. Such actions, right? Now in Medina was the exact opposite. In fact, Abdullah ibn Abbas narrates that Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhuma says something which is very potent and telling, but also kind of funny. He says, كنا نحن معشر المهاجرين قوم نغلب نساءنا. We, al-Muhajirin, the immigrants from Mecca, we were in control in our own families. We used to discipline our wives, right? وجئنا المدينة فوجدنا أن الأنصار قوما تغلبهم نساؤهم. When we came to Medina, we realized that the Ansar are people whose wives are kind of in control, right? So we are in control of our wives, but the women of Medina it turns out that they are sort of like more in control of their husbands. And then he says, and this is when it really gets funny, فَجَعَلَ نِسَاءُ الْمُهَاجِرِينَ يَتَأَدَّبْنَ بِأَدَبِ نِسَاءِ الْأَنصَارِ. So gradually the women of Muhajirin, all the Sahabiyat that are coming from Mecca, they gradually started to absorb the qualities and the character of the women of Ansar. So they are gradually refusing that their husbands lay fingers on them. You can't do that because, the wife of this Sahabi and that Sahabi said, my husband never lays a finger on me. You shouldn't allow your husband to do that. And he was about to become a big fitna in Medina. I'll talk about that, inshallah, a little bit later. But what is it? What is the value of Nisa'ul Ansar? Think about that. Aisha radiallahu anha says about the women of Medina, the women of Ansar, خَيْرُ نِسَاءِ الْأَرْضِ نِسَاءَ الْأَنصَارِ. The best of women are the women of Ansar. Why? لَمْ يَمْنَعْهُنَّ الْحَيَاءُ أَنْ يَتَفَقَّهْنَ فِي الدِّينِ. Their modesty and their shyness never prevented them from asking the tough questions, the sensitive, intimate questions about the deen. They used to come to the Prophet ﷺ at the masjid and ask him questions, and his face would turn red, and he would be like almost having a hard time responding to the questions, kind of like what happens to me sometimes when I get those really sensitive questions from sisters, right? And they would still, with boldness, they would go with courage, they would go to Rasulullah ﷺ, ask him all kinds of intimate questions. So again, we are remembering them in a positive light. What they did was the right thing. So I'm just laying the foundation here between the character of the women in Mecca and the character of the women in Medina. This is what the scholars said. Another foundation that I need to lay on the floor, inshallah, before I actually go into the ayah, is the majority of the scholars, the linguists, the fuqaha, the muhaddithin, the mufassirin, ulama al-kalam, the majority of the scholars of most Islamic science are in disagreement, in agreement, are in full agreement that a man hitting his wife is the worst and most dishonorable of all acts. In fact, many of them say that this is outright wrong and haram. Take, for example, Ata ibn Abi Rabah, by far the greatest of all the tabi'een, a student of Abdullah ibn Abbas. Ata ibn Abi Rabah said, it is not permitted for a man to lay a finger on his wife, to beat his wife. حتى وإن أمرها ونهاها فلم تطعه. Even if he admonishes her or orders her, commands her to do something and she refuses. ولكن له أن يغضب عليها. It is permissible for him to get a little bit upset or a little bit angry or disappointed or frustrated. But you cannot lay a finger on her. It is the madhab of the majority of the scholars that this is the most dishonorable of all acts. The Prophet ﷺ in the hadith, sahih, right? He says, لا تضربوا إماء الله. Do not beat women. Do not lay a finger on the worshippers of Allah, the female worshippers of Allah. Do not hit women. How do we reconcile all of that? How do we reconcile the social, the religious background against the backdrop of the ayah that we just recited, that basically says, if you are fearful of your wife's nushuz, and I'm not going to do injustice to that word and translate it at face value, I will just leave it at that. If you are fearful of your wife's nushuz, you need to follow 3 steps, as the ayah says, right? Number 1, عِظُوهُنَّ, give them advice, admonish them, talk to them, right? Number 2, أُهْجُرُهُنَّ فِي الْمَضَاجِعِ, abandon intimacy, abandon them in bed. And number 3, اضْرِبُوهُنَّ, beat them. And I will explain, inshallah, what all that means tonight and in the next khatira, inshallah. How do we reconcile all of that?